Hi, Bob from Pinegrow here with another tutorial in our series looking at converting the agency HTML template over to a WordPress theme with Gutenberg blocks. In our past tutorials, we've looked at creating a regular block, that is a block without PHP in it, for this top hero. And in that block, we added block attributes, so you could change the content of the different text, you could change the image, you could change the links on the buttons. We also created a nested block. So we created a block where we had an outer block that inserted this entire section of logos here, as well as an inner block that could only be added within our outer block that allowed the end user to add one or more of these logo images in. And then finally, we also added a dynamic block. That is a block that accesses WordPress PHP functions. And for that, we converted this block here in the agency template over to one that can receive custom posts from a new type called news and display them in place of these different blocks here. So for this particular tutorial, I was going to create a new type of template page for displaying our individual news items or individual blogs, things like that. So a whole new template. But instead, I wanted to go back and look at a special use case for using a nested block. In this case, I'm going to convert a Bootstrap carousel, Bootstrap carousel over to a nested block where each of the inner blocks in that nested block is one of the slides within the carousel. So you can see here we've got a testimonial. Let me just go ahead and turn JavaScript back on so we can skip to the next one, and we've got 3 slides here basically. And so we just want to convert this over to an outer testimonial block that also contains within it the ability for the user to add as many slides or as many testimonials as they want. And because this is populated and a lot of the display of it is changed by JavaScript within the Bootstrap package, that presents a little bit of a challenge, and we're going to talk about how we address that challenge within the Gutenberg editor backend or the WordPress backend. This is going to be using, again, a Bootstrap carousel, but any type of element that you might want to add to the page where it is dynamically adding styling or dynamically adding content is going to need some type of workaround. So this is applicable to much more than just Bootstrap. So let's go ahead and get started. The other thing today is, or for this tutorial is, I'm going to skip some of the parts. So at this point, we've had several tutorials where we've added block attributes to change content, to change color, things like that, classes. So I'm going to skip over some of that. I'm not going to add as many features to this block. And the features that I do add, I'll probably speed the video up basically, just to get through those and make this a little bit shorter. All right, so let's get started. So one of the let's get started. So if we click this, I'm going to collapse this down, give us a little bit more room. So I'm just going to double click that. So now we have a little bit more room here to see what's going on. So first thing we're going to do, I'm going to turn JavaScript off just so that it's not constantly flashing and changing. It just makes it a little easier for me. So then we highlight this. This is the section that we're going to add our block onto. So with that highlighted, we switch to our WordPress actions, go ahead and make it into a block. Again, we have to give it a unique ID, so PGC, and then we'll call this one something like testimonial block. That is some horrible spelling right there. Okay, PGC testimonial block. Testimonial block. I looked up earlier in the WordPress or the dash icons, this database. The cool thing about this database is it has several related icons, so we can use one icon for the main block and then another icon that's very related for the inner ones. This is actually, it's kind of silly, but finding the right icon for your blocks is kind of something that's an ongoing pain. Sorry about that. I have some wires in the way. Okay, and then for category, we want custom, and we're going to set it to our PGC theme blocks, which we've already registered, so we don't have to register it again. Okay, so now we have our main block that's going to export all of this. I think if this was the first tutorial at putting together a block, I would now add a block attribute onto this to change the background color, since just to be able to customize that to fit with our other blocks that we've also been able to change background color. I'm not going to do that. We would do that just so you remember with a select. So under block attribute, we would change the class because Bootstrap adds their colors with classes. We would use make this a little bit bigger, a control type of select, and then give the user the different colors to select from that list that we generated previously. Okay, I'm just going to remove that for right now. So what else are we going to want to allow the user to control on this? Well, this testimonials, we're going to want to add a block attribute onto this. Remember that within a block, our attribute IDs do not have to be unique. And we're going to come back to a neat trick that you can use these IDs not being unique to accomplish. So let's just say testimonial, underscore lead. We're going to be able to change the content. Not that it matters. And we really don't have to do anything about the content here. I guess we could change the control to rich text as opposed to a straight input. I'd probably want to also go ahead and add another attribute for color here. But let's just go ahead and go to the next one. Again, we're going to want to add some type of control here. Here we could decide to change the font weight or add a control to say make it all uppercase, something like that if we so desired, just by adding additional attributes. Here I'm just going to leave all of this as auto and default value. Okay, so now that we've sort of got the basics of controls on the outer testimonial block, next we're going to want to decide how we want to modify the rest of this block. So if we look at the structure, we've got this outer carousel. And then within that outer carousel, there's, let's just close this down. There's two different main elements. There's a carousel inner. This is a wrapper that's going to go around all of our slides. So our individual testimonials. And then at the bottom, a list. And this list it contains the testimonial navigation. And when we get down to it, we're going to alter this list slightly. Basically to allow for a better user experience at the end. And we'll come to that in just a second. But just looking at this, what we're going to want to do is we're not going to want to make this a block because we don't want a whole set of slides plus the navigation added each time the user wants to add a single new testimonial. Instead, we're going to want to make these carousel slides the inner nested block. So I'm just going to close that down. So we've got 3 of them in here. And so the first thing that we're going to want to do is convert this upper one to a new block. Okay, so we'll click on that, go back over to our WordPress actions, and add this as a block. So we're going to add this as PGC, say, testimonial item. Testimonial item, slightly different icon, and again, register it, or excuse me, place it within our custom registered PGC-theme blocks area. All right, and so that's pretty much all that we have to do there to make this a block. So now we have this PGC-testimonial-item. So there's going to be 2 different options that we're going to want to put on this. So first off, we're only going to want these PGC-testimonial-item blocks within our carousel. So we're going to have to do 2 things to kind of narrow down or limit the choices our end user has. So first, let's look here. So we want our carousel slides inside of this carousel inner wrapper. So we're going to take that and we're going to add a WordPress action to it. We're going to add block inner content. And we're going to say that the only blocks that we can put in that wrapper are our testimonial items. So PGC testimonial item. Okay. And now second, if we go back here, go to this block, basically we only want testimonials to be within the carousel. So not only do we want to limit our testimonial items to only being in our carousel inner wrapper, we want to make sure not to add these carousel slides to some other complete different area of the page. We only want it in a carousel. So the way we can do that is we can take a look at this block and grab the name. So we're just copying that ID, going back down, jumping down to our carousel slide. And this, we didn't use this before on the last nested block. But down here, we've got an input field called parents. And that parents basically limits what parent that block can go inside. So we're just going to say this. So now what this means is there's no place else on the page that we can add one of these carousel slides in. So if we want to add a different, if we want to add these slides to a different one, we'd have to come back to this block and add additional parents or create an all new block for testimonials that go in any other carousels on the page. Okay, so we've got that set up now. Let's now put some block attributes onto this slide, and then we'll take a look at what it looks like. Jump back over here. So within each carousel slide, you've got a row that contains it all and then two columns. The first column has an image, so we're going to want to be able to alter that. And then the second column has an image, which is this, which is an SVG that creates these quotes. We're going to leave that alone. If you, obviously, if you wanted to spend more time on this, you could change that. And then we're also going to want to change the text, both here, the author, and the author position. So let's just quickly add those. Okay, so now we have each of those all set up and altered. So now let's go back really quickly to the tree. And before we save and export this and look on the WordPress side, let's think about one other thing. So again, we have the carousel with 3 slides inside. So a lot of times when we're designing for WordPress, like for example, in Pinegrow, like for example in this one, we're really only putting any kind of attributes and actions on, or excuse me, actions onto this first of the 3 items. But in the end, we want all 3 of these to be populated. However, basically what we're doing is we're telling Pinegrow, don't bother with exporting these 2 because they're only there to make the design look nice while we're in Pinegrow, but they're not actually used and can cause problems when you export it into the WordPress side. So for these, what we did, how we got around that is we put an item placeholder action onto them. In this case, however, we only see this first slide. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of the other 2 slides rather than putting placeholders on. And the reason why I'm doing this is sometimes in certain contexts, especially in active blocks, or excuse me, dynamic blocks, you can have problems with conflicts with the don't export. And so typically it's easier just to, just to go ahead and delete those items. So that's what we're going to do. So now we're down to just this one slide. So now we're going to save that. So this is coming again. You've seen this in other tutorials from where I've done some work outside of the tutorial on this template, exported it, and now I'm doing a major modification. you shouldn't really see that very often, if at all. So don't worry about if you don't see those. Okay, jumping back over into WordPress, let's go ahead and create a new page. New testimonial. Okay, click on here. We have our testimonial block here. Let's go ahead and add that. And so we have our testimonial block. We can change our lead text. We can change our headline. Again, we could put more effort into this as far as the block attributes that we're adding to this. And we have our slide down here. If we go ahead and click on that, we can see all of the different editable items within this. All right, so just to point out, if we go outside of our testimonial block, click on this and click Browse All, scroll down to our list, what we can see is that there's no testimonial item here. That's because, again, we registered it such that the testimonial item has to be in a parental testimonial block. So WordPress knows enough not to give us the option of selecting that block outside of one of these. And if we look in here, let me just click this back on. It's a little irritating thing to me. Sometimes when you switch in and out of the block menu, sometimes it turns off all of your block properties. And sometimes I forget that happens, and then I go searching for them. At any point, if we go back in here now, click on this, we can see we can edit this. And clicking out here, we can go ahead and add an additional testimonial item. So we can see as we hover over this, it says add additional testimonial item. So let's go ahead and click that. Okay, now it seems like nothing happened. And here's where the sort of caveat, where the problem is with content where it's updated for display, or the content itself is added by JavaScript. So sometimes the backend doesn't quite know how to manage this. And what we're going to do next is look at a little workaround for this. All right, so let's see what's actually happening here. So it looks like we have exactly the same testimonial, nothing added, but it's actually not true. So we can see that if we go ahead and add this really nice picture of a pine tree in. So notice I don't have alt text, bad Bob. If we select that, so that pine tree is actually a little bit different dimensions than the dog picture. This is something else that you could change by block attribute, because this is hard-coded into the Bootstrap template. So to make all of these images the same size, you'd want to make sure that the end user could control for that. But at any point, in this case, what it does is it kind of serves a nice little function for us, where we can see that because this is different and because the text is centered, we can see we almost have a duplicate of the text that's shifted down. And we can change that. We can say, so we can see this, the second testimonial text is here, second testimonial text kind of below that original text because it's shifted by the pine tree. We could change the testimonial author. Change the author position. So we can basically make some changes there that allow these, or make some changes to our text, and we can see that there actually is two testimonials there. They're just right over, smack over the top of one another. So it's almost like they have different Z stack values. Well, they probably actually do have different Z stack values. So there is kind of a workaround. So if we were to export this out to the front end right now, this would work. But this is a really bad user editing experience. And there's one not great workaround, but if we wanted to, we can just basically change the order of our blocks in the HTML. That's going to, in effect, give a different Z index for each of those. And now we can access this one and make edits to it. But it looks horrible. And if we were to have 3 or 4 of these, it would get confusing really quickly. So we need to take care of that somehow. So let's drop back into Pinegrow and look at what's causing this. So I'm just going to click over here, desktop 3. All right. So what's happening here? So if we take a look at our carousel and we look at this the carousel slide itself, what actually is causing that to display is a Bootstrap class of active. So basically, when you set up a Bootstrap carousel, you only want your very first slide to have an active on it, and you want the rest of the slides not to have that active class. That way, Bootstrap knows which one to display first. The other thing is that that active class adds some CSS to that particular slide to make it display. Otherwise, without the active class, those carousel items automatically are hidden. So we have to do two things. One, we have to add a control so we can toggle this active class. And two, for the back end anyway, we have to add additional styling that's going to overcome having it hidden by the carousel dash item, as well as add some styling so that the different carousel items aren't laid over the top of one another. All right, so let's go ahead and add that active toggle first. So if we go back over into our WordPress actions, so we want on the same carousel slide to add that action. So we're going to go down. Let's pull this up to our block attributes. Go ahead and add that, and then we're going to want a new attribute here. So we're going to call this testimonial item active. In this case, we're changing the class, that active class. We're going to want to replace active. I really can't write testimonial. We're going to want to, so we want to let the user know what this is for. So do we want to make this slide active? Actually, let's call it a testimonial since this whole thing is a testimonial block. And then if empty, we're going to have it use the default value. That's because if you have it on remove the element, it's going to remove the entire slide. That's not what we want. Whoops. And default value active. So that's going, when the toggle is turned on, it's going to turn, it's going to add the active class. When it's turned off, it will remove the active class. And that's something that's built into Pinegrow. It knows to toggle that. Alternatively, we could leave this blank just like this and actively remove the active class from our block. That because right now, every single slide that we're new testimonial item that we're adding in has the active class. So if we were just to remove the class and leave this as blank, then yeah, it would toggle that way. But we don't have to do that. We can just highlight this and say the default value is active. All right, and then finally, we want this to be a toggle with a value of active. Actually, we want the default value. I apologize. We want the default value to be nothing, and we want the value if the toggle is on to be active. All right, so now let's see what that gives us. This is going to give us a little bit of a surprise, but then we're going to get around that. So we're going to save it, export it, go over into WordPress again. Oops. Go ahead and reload this. Remember, we have two testimonials currently in place here. And now we see none of them. And that's because both of the testimonials have had that active class removed because the testimonial toggle is off. So now what we have to do is we have to go back in and we have to add the styling so that even with the active turned off, we can see those different slides. All right, so let's jump over into Pinegrow. And then I'm just going to pause this really quickly because I realized I don't have my IDE set up in order to display the code we need. So I will be right back. Okay, so now I have my code editor pulled up, and within it I have the CSS that we're going to add back in on the back end in order to override those styles that are giving us problems. So again, when we're in a carousel, we have a couple of different rules going on. So this one is just hiding any of the overflow. But the kind of important one is this second rule here, where we're adding on to our carousel item, and we're saying to add a display block. So normally the display is basically hidden, display none. We're adding a float. Or excuse me, we're removing any float, and we're removing the margin on this. And then we're also adding that, we're putting some controls onto the carousel controls. And we'll come back to this. We still have to alter the carousel controls. But basically, that's what these rules are going to do. So in order to toggle those rules on and off, what we're going to do is we're going to add an additional class of show-slides. So when show-slides is on, we'll be able to see all of the slides. When it's off, we'll only be able to see the one that has the active added to it. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to copy all of this, and we're going to switch back over into Pinegrow. All right, and so we're here. So I'm just going to re-expand our project window here and add a new file. And we're going to call this Testimonial CSS. Let's go ahead and open that in our code editor and paste in our CSS. Okay, so now that we have this new CSS page, we need to do two things. First, we need to make a control, I apologize for that, a control to toggle that show-slides. And notice where, notice the selector for this rule. So it's .carousel.showSlides. So we need to add the show-slides class onto the main carousel. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to want to add it here. We go into our WordPress. Let's go ahead and collapse this down first. Give us a little bit more working room. Go into our block attributes. And again, we're going to want to add that slide show. So testimonial show slides, a little bit long-winded. So here we're going to ask the user if they want to show all slides. Again, show all testimonials. And we want it, not content, we want it as class. We're not going to be replacing a class since one doesn't exist there. Default value, we're going to leave it as off. We're going to have it as a toggle. And if the toggle is on, we want to add the class of show-slides. Okay, so now that's going to go ahead and show all of our slides. That's not going to be enough because this particular page of CSS isn't added anywhere. So it's not coming in on our master page template. And unless we ask it to, it's not going to be loaded onto this page. But we don't actually want this CSS to be coming through onto our front end. We only want it in the editor. I'm just going to save this real quick and close it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back out to our tree. We're going to select the main block. And we're going to say, basically, if the user selects this block, we want to load our extra styling. So go back into WordPress. Actions, and for our block we're going to go down here to the editor style. So again, the style input is going to bring it in on the front end. The editor style is going to bring it in on the back end. And we only want to load this style if we're actually using this block. So I'm going to click here and we're going to find our testimonial.css. So select that. All right, so now let's see if that works really quickly. Select all. Again, you may or may not see that. Go over here, we're going to reload. So now we have the same impact. There's no slides with the active turned on, no testimonials with that active turned on. So they're all going to be hidden from sight. But now we have this control here, show all testimonials. We'll go ahead and click that on. And now we can see both of our different testimonials. And if we wanted to, we can change the order of those. So this is our first and this is our second. All right, so we have that coded in now. So then the and the other thing that we have, if we click within our individual testimonials, is now we have this block property of make testimonial active. So now if we click that on, this is now identified as the first slide in our testimonial, the first one that will come up, and then each of these will be the subsequent slides. So let's just see what happens now that we've made that one active. If we go back out to our testimonial, click off Show All Testimonials. Basically what this will do is show us what our page is going to look like on the front end, since only the active slide will be displayed at any time. All right, so there we can toggle back and forth between editing multiple testimonials or looking at what the design looks like with just the one testimonial being displayed. All right, so the last thing that we have to do is we have to deal with the navigation. And this, I must admit, gave me a little bit of pause because I really like this type of navigation on the testimonial. The problem is this isn't very user-friendly. That's because for every single different testimonial that's added, for every single slide that's added, the user would have to add another one of these navigation items manually, unless you were to write some JavaScript that automatically populated these, that dynamically added to the HTML on the page in order to add these navigation elements in. And instead, I think what we're going to do is we're going to opt for using the previous and next navigation items. So just the standard arrows that are found within the navigation. And so let's go back. And once again, to make this change, I'm just going to pause the video really quickly, jump out to the Bootstrap site and copy some code and then put it into my Pinegrow. So once again, let's jump over into Pinegrow. I'm going to pause the video and be right back. Okay, we're back. Like I said, I paused the video, went out to the Bootstrap site and grabbed some code and then went ahead and pasted it into my page in a wrapper. So I just threw a div around it and then put these two buttons in here, one for previous, one for next. And I did just a little bit of inline styling. If I was doing this as a full theme, I would export the styling, of course, to the style sheet that's loaded into the master page. And basically all I did was I just added a flex display to this div and moved the two buttons down and centered them up a little bit with flex start and flex end. And then the other thing that I did was to the actual carousel itself, I added an extra class of carousel -dark. So that then turned those previous and next to a dark color. And there's a number of different ways you could also style this differently. All right. So let's get back to the actual topic of the video and let's link these up with our slides. So the way that the navigation works in Bootstrap is it has, if we just look at the properties here, so it has two different attributes that are contributing to the navigation. The one is the data-bs-slide that specifies which slide this controller is linked to. And in this case, it's linked to the previous slide. The other one would be linked to the next slide. So when Bootstrap sees those, it goes to whatever the previously activated slide is or the next slide in the whole sequence of slides. The other thing, and the one that's important for us right now, is the data-bs-target. So this attribute receives an ID. That ID specifies which carousel these controls should work for. So in this case, because I grabbed it from the Bootstrap site, it actually has the ID of carousel example controls. So we need to change that, and we need to change it for both of our controls, our previous and our next. And then the other thing that we need to do that we haven't done yet is actually give the user the ability to change the ID of the actual carousel. So that way they can have multiple carousels on the page, multiple carousels throughout their project, each with a unique ID. So let's do that first. Whoops. Actually go here. We're going to make sure that the carousel itself is selected. And then we're going to go to our WordPress actions. Go ahead and add an attribute. And in this case, it's going to be the testimonial ID. We're going to use this as an attribute. The element attribute is going to be ID. And the title, testimonial ID. under the attribute options. If empty, we're going to have it use the default value. Right now, that is set, we can see up here, to an ID of carousel 7. We'll just leave it at that. And then carousel 7. Actually, let's change that to just plain carousel. Default value carousel. Control type we can just use as auto, and it's going to replace the current value. So let's jump back over into the tree. Actually, we'll jump to properties, and we're going to edit this to say just plain carousel. All right, so now we've got the ID of the carousel set, and we have given a way for the user to change that ID. Now we have to make sure that that ID gets put into our navigation. And there's a couple of different ways we can do that. So let's switch back over to here. Let's select our carousel pre-button. And so remember, we now have to change this data-bs-target. So if we go ahead and add a block attribute to this, there's two different ways we can do this, and I'll show you the first way, which is maybe a little bit more work. So basically, we want this to be invisible to the end user. We want the end user to change the carousel ID and automatically have these linked navigation items change to the correct target. So this one is, so there's two different ways we can do it. So first, let me show you the way we can do it using expressions. We haven't used expressions yet. And this is a good use case for them. So this is the preview button. So testimonial previous target. And then we're going to use this as an attribute. The attribute is data BS target. We don't actually have to fill in a title here because this isn't going to be displayed to the end user. And then for the attribute option, we're going to say use default value. Yeah, I think that's the best way to go. Replace current value. And in this case, we're going to, so we'll give this a default value of hash carousel. I think this will work. And then for the expression, so because we're targeting an ID, we need to prefix whatever the ID is with a hash. So what we're going to say is hash. And then what we want to do is we want to fetch the value that the user added for the carousel ID. So what we're going to do is we're going to use curly brace, or mustache, and then we just have to remember what that was. I think it was testimonial ID. I think that's right. And then for control type, we're going to use none. So basically what that's going to do is it's going to block the presentation of this, of any kind of input box from the within the blocks attribute editor section of the back end. So let me just check, make sure this testimonial ID is correct. So pat back to my tree, go up to here, check my actions again, and yes, testimonial _ ID. So now we want to do that for the next button as well. So add block attribute, testimonial, next, target, use as attribute, data BS target. Don't have to worry about title. Empty is default value, and we're going to say carousel. Replace the current value, and again, hash testimonial ID. And so basically what we're doing with this here is we're just taking the exact input that came from the testimonial ID, prefixing it with this hash, and then adding it into the to the data-bs-target attribute. So let's see if this worked out okay. Go ahead and save that. Okay. I did notice this. So you might have noticed when I was reloading and I was doing edits to my testimonials that there was the constant reloading. And that happens when you have dynamic blocks. And so if you run into a message like this, or if there's another message, maybe we'll see it on the back end. Let's see if what happens if we now go over into WordPress. So I can just show you if you run into this error message, what you should do. So we're reloading that. Okay, we're not getting an error message here, but one of the things that can happen is if you try to put certain code into a dynamic block where it conflicts, you'll get an error message here in this back end, usually around SVG images and such like that. That's your key to know that somehow you're outputting those blocks incorrectly. So let's just jump back over into Pinegrow and look what's happening. So if we go into WordPress, I think maybe in a past tutorial, I might have changed the theme and plugin settings. So if we go down here to the end, we can see that my block type that I exported here, or the sort of default block type I'm editing or exporting is a dynamic PHP block. Let's turn that off. Let's turn it back to regular JavaScript blocks. Save that setting. And then let's make sure that both of our blocks here are in fact set to be regular blocks. So check this one really quickly, go into the WordPress actions. So this is auto. Since my project settings are now regular blocks, that'll be regular. Next block down is the slides. Select this one, check in the actions. And this one's also auto. So both of those should now be regular blocks, not dynamic blocks. So let's go ahead and save that. Let's export. Okay, so now we're not getting the error messages. So everything should be fine. Let's jump back over into WordPress. Let's reload. So in this case, because I changed the type of block, WordPress is a little confused. So we're just going to hit attempt block recovery. And we have to do that for each of the different testimonials. Okay, so now this should be good. If you look, if we select our actual main testimonial block, we now have this carousel or testimonial ID. That's interesting that it's showing this. It shouldn't. I bet I forgot to select none for the control type. Let's see if this works though. So we're just going to go ahead and preview this. Let's save it first. Preview new tab. So there's our testimonial block. We click on the arrow, and again, and indeed it does advance through the slides. Both the next and the previous seem to be working. Okay, let's go back to Pinegrow and let me just check what I selected wrong. So go in here, and I think it was the next that was the problem. So if I select that one and go to my WordPress actions, yeah, I left the control type as auto, and that should be set to none, use with expressions. All right, so there's a second way that we can do this that takes advantage of the fact that you don't have to have unique attribute IDs for all of your fields. And in fact, if you don't, you can actually grab the value from another field. So in this case, what we're going to do is instead of having testimonial_next target and grabbing the testimonial ID value, we're just going to automatically fill this with the testimonial_ID value that the user inputs. So we just say testimonial ID, we say attribute, data BS target. And in this case, we can, again, use default value. We, in this case, don't need to use an expression. And in fact, it probably wouldn't matter what we used here. And then we just can say append to the current value. The only difference is, if we do it this way, is we have to change what the actual ID is on these two controls. So let's go ahead and change that really quickly. So from the properties, we're then going to go to this, edit our actual attribute value to just be a hash. And so now what that's going to do is it's going to grab whatever value is put into the testimonial ID and then append it to this hash. All right, so we've got the one altered. Let's go ahead and alter the previous one. Again, jump back into the attribute editor, highlight it, and delete everything up to the hash and leave the hash in there. And then with this one, we're going to change this ID and basically leave everything else there except we can get rid of this. All right, let's see if this works. So just fair warning, this might not work. In putting together the tutorial in a different context, I found a little error that should be fixed in Pinegrow. If not this, it should be fixed in this update. It might be already in the live. And that particular update allows you to, or gives the replace and append an additional, which is replace without space. So the append without space. So with classes, you want to append with a space. With IDs like this, you're going to want to append it without a space. So let's go ahead and see if this works out. And if not, that's going to be the reason why. So save that, export, jump back over into WordPress and reload. No, we're not going to want to reload here. We're going to want to reload here. Okay, so now if we look here, our our extra input field has disappeared since I switched it over to none. And let's see if it works. Preview new tab. Okay, so we're working just fine. All right, so I think that is all that I wanted to show you for this particular video. I think the next in the series is probably going to be the last in the series. We've covered the majority of the controls for making Gutenberg blocks. We've covered both normal and dynamic blocks. We've looked at what a nested block is and the different controls for that. I haven't covered ACF blocks. I don't know if I might do that, but they're really not that much different than a custom post type block. So I don't know if there's a need to go over those. But what we haven't done yet is we've only so far brought a single page into our WordPress theme, and it'd be nice to customize a couple of other pages. So I think that's what I'm going to cover in the next tutorial. Please feel free to leave comments below the video if you're watching this on YouTube, or jump over to our forum, open up a discussion, tell me what you liked or didn't like about the video, what you'd like me to cover in more detail. But until the next time, have fun designing with Pinegrow.